So here's something I've been thinking about for a while. Leaking quantum matter. And why do we assume memories are stored in our brain? And thinking about this has been triggered by two programs that I saw years ago, and they were both medical documentaries. One was about stories from medical records about people's near-death experiences or clinical death and then being resuscitated and their out-of-body death experiences. And the other was about organ donor recipients and how they started having the memories of the person that had donated the organ. There was one woman who had a liver transplant and maybe another organ and started craving fish fingers, and she'd always hated fish fingers before, and then discovered that her organs that she'd received were from a young lad that had been sadly killed in a motor accident but absolutely adored fish fingers. What's that about? So anyway, the programme about the near-death experiences was explaining that medical records have been kept since 1981, I think, recording the stories of people who'd been pronounced clinically dead and been resuscitated, and what was your experience, and all their stories were recorded. And you can look it up on Wikipedia. I think it's near-death experiences, NDE, and there are several common elements. There's awareness of being dead. There's overwhelming peace. There's an out-of-body experience, sometimes observing doctors and nurses performing medical procedures and resuscitation procedures. A sense of moving up and maybe through a passage. Rapid movement towards the light. Intense feeling of something like unconditional love. And encountering beings of light or dressed in light, or even relatives that have died. There's a lot of records of people receiving a life review from a kind of mentor person they meet, or a life preview of what they should be going back to. And then there's usually a decision by the person who's died, or an encouragement from the being that's with them to return, and a sense of reluctance too, because they're experiencing this wonderful peace, etc. So all these common elements in all the stories. So that kind of sounds a bit boring and academic, but in this programme all these different people were sharing their stories and their experiences, and it was just fascinating. So for example, there was one guy who was a really intelligent guy and had done really well in business, but he tended to screw people over and really was not a nice person and had not lived a very nice life. And I can't remember how he died, maybe a car accident or an illness or something. And he had these experiences as well, out-of-body experience, going towards the light, and his overwhelming feeling, some people had overwhelming, unconditional love or amazing music or something, and his was being in the presence of ultimate intelligence. And he had this experience of receiving a life review and on a life preview, hey, you've really screwed some people over and you need to put this right, and this is not what you were wired up for, and you could be doing this. So he went back, and it's exactly what he did. So he sold everything and he paid people back that he'd screwed over, and went and apologised to them and said, I realised that I lived my life very badly. And then he just kept enough material possessions to allow him to function in business as a business consultant, or a coach for releasing people's potential into businesses and different things that they wanted to do. So using his intelligence and releasing other people's skills. But anyway, that's just another fascinating bit. But the point of this video that I'm talking to you about now is more the craziness of being able to, when you're dead, come out of your body and observe medical staff performing procedures. What is that about? They've been pronounced clinically dead, and the notes from their interview afterwards correspond exactly with what the doctors and nurses were doing. So there was this girl that had an aneurysm. You can Google that as well, but it's a blood vessel that's kind of blown up like a balloon, and she had it in her skull somewhere, so it could burst at any minute. A real time bomb. So yeah, you'd probably want to get that operated on, but the operation is 50-50, you don't know whether you're going to survive it or not. And her medical team had started using this new technique. Again, I'm going into too much detail and getting distracted, but it's just another fascinating aspect to it, where in order to allow them to keep everything very safe, they wanted to make her clinically dead so that they didn't like damage any kind of brain stuff going on. But in order to keep her clinically dead for a while, they needed to lower her body temperature to like almost freezing so that she could stay dead for a while and not like do any damage to organs, etc, etc. Crazy. Anyway, this girl remembers having an out-of-body experience and hovering over the shoulder of the main surgeon and looking at the clock, seeing what the time was, and thinking, why are there medical staff operating on my leg when I'm supposed to be having a brain surgery? And then also somebody came into the operating theatre with something that looked like her dad's socket set. So you might want to Google socket set if you don't know what that is, but it's basically like generic spanner but with lots of different ends that you can stick on for different nuts, etc. Anyway, so she saw something like this being brought in, and then she had this whole kind of like, you know, moving towards the light experience, etc. And she met her uncle, who was dead, and he said, no, your time's not up, you need to go back. She was a musician, and he said, like, there's a future for you, there's more music you need to write and perform. And she had this whole reluctance experience because she was experiencing this wonderful peace and also this incredible music. And she was saying to her uncle, but I know if I go back, I am going to feel so much pain. You know, they're actually slicing the top of my skull off. I am going to be in pain for weeks. Why would I want to do that? It's beautiful here and I'm enjoying being with you. And her experience was like as if her uncle was pushing her into a swimming pool. So she felt this kind of plunge into this kind of swimming pool, and she was back in her body and she was in the recovery room after the operation. So the main surgeon was interviewed, and he was saying that when they looked at the notes of her interview thing from her death experience thing, they couldn't believe how accurate it was. The time on the clock was after she'd been declared clinically dead, and yeah, okay, we can go ahead with this operation because she's now, all the brain activity has ceased. And they were removing an artery from her leg to use to mend the aneurysm, so that was why they were operating on her leg in a brain surgery. And he'd called for this equipment that he needed to be brought in, which was just like a socket set, and he was saying she would never have seen that because it didn't come into the room until after she was clinically dead, and it was taken out afterwards, and she wouldn't have seen it in the recovery room. So he was just like astonished. Anyway, there was this doctor that was being interviewed throughout the whole programme that was kind of the main person, kind of saying, you know, we just don't really know about the brain. This goes to show we don't really know how the brain works and how thought activity works. We assume it's all kind of hardwired electrical impulses going around these nerves in the physical bounds of your head, but maybe it's more like quantum mechanics with wave-like behaviour and interaction of energy and matter and subatomic particles and stuff. So maybe for this girl, all the kind of wave interaction with subatomic particles and stuff, getting its energy from the electrical activity in her brain. Once her brain activity stopped, the electrical impulses going around her brain ceased, maybe this quantum matter needed to kind of move towards the nearest electrical brain energy, which was the surgeon. So maybe this quantum matter was picking up sight messages going to the surgeon's brain, and why she was able to pick up vision messages from things that were going on in the room. And it kind of makes sense. Today, you know, like we don't just use phones that are like hardwired in with curly wires coming from the receiver. We've got mobile phones, we set up a Wi-Fi hub, and we sit on the settee on our mobile phones and watch a video through the internet, and the nearer you are to the hub, the better the signal. So why are we surprised when a couple of people are sitting on a sofa and one says, why don't we go to the cinema to see The Intern? And then the other person says, I was just thinking that. And then a third person walking by says, that's weird, I was just reading a review about The Intern. It's leaking quantum matter, isn't it? Oh yeah, and another thing, that completely different programme about the organ donor recipients. Again, the main doctor guy in that being interviewed was saying, why do we assume memories are stored within the physical bounds of the brain when we've got a nervous system that is sending electrical impulses all over the body to different muscles and different tissue? So, are all the memories of when we've fallen in love, etc., stored in the heart tissue muscle? Or is it not even as organised as that? Is it more random? Is that horrible memory of Miss Hunter in year 6 at school stored in my right butt cheek? Or is that amazing memory of that wonderful chicken dish that I had at Ronnie Scott's at that Georgie Fame gig stored in my left bicep? Let me know in the comments below what you think and if you've had any experiences of leaking quantum matter and what your theory is.